In today's video, we're looking at the most terrifying couple deaths ever recorded. From newlyweds crushed by a 200-pound antique mirror in a bridal boutique, to a devoted pair electrocuted while renovating their dream kitchen. It was March 15th, 2014, and the warm evening air carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms through downtown Portland, Oregon. The Riverside restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation, as couples celebrated intimate dinners in the upscale establishment's dimly lit dining room. Soft jazz music drifted from hidden speakers, while candlelight flickered across white tablecloths, creating the perfect atmosphere for romance and special occasions. Marcus Rivera straightened his tie nervously as he checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. At 34, the successful accountant had just made partner at his firm, after years of 60-hour work weeks and weekend sacrifices. His wife Elena sat across from him, radiant in the blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary. At 31, the head nurse at Portland General Hospital had recently received a promotion that finally allowed them to breathe financially after 7 years of marriage filled with student loans and entry-level salaries. Their usual corner table overlooked the Willamette River, where they'd shared their first date and later their engagement dinner. Tonight marked their 7th wedding anniversary, and friends often called them relationship goals for their unwavering devotion to each other. They'd weathered financial struggles, career pressures, and family challenges, emerging stronger each time. Elena had been tracking her ovulation cycle for months, and they'd been trying to start a family with renewed optimism. Their recent promotions meant they could finally afford the house with a yard they'd been dreaming about, complete with space for children and the golden retriever Elena had always wanted. The evening began perfectly as they shared stories about their workdays and planned their upcoming vacation to Italy. Marcus had secretly arranged for the restaurant to serve Elena's favorite chocolate souffle with a candle, just like their wedding night 7 years earlier. Their waiter, David, had served them dozens of times over the past 3 years, always commenting on their obvious devotion to each other. Elena wore the sapphire earrings Marcus had given her for Christmas, and they sparkled in the candlelight as she laughed at his stories. The couple had even discussed baby names during appetizers, with Elena favoring traditional choices, while Marcus preferred more modern options. They'd already started looking at houses in the suburbs, dreaming of weekend barbecues and children's birthday parties in their future backyard. At 8:47 p.m., they shared the restaurant's signature crab cakes appetizer, feeding each other bites while laughing about Marcus's failed attempt at cooking the previous weekend. A few minutes later, Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a sudden wave of nausea tightening his stomach. Elena rubbed her abdomen, wincing as she admitted she felt lightheaded. At first, they brushed it off as rich food on nearly empty stomachs. By 8:55, the symptoms grew harder to ignore. Marcus leaned forward, clutching his side as sharp cramps spread through his abdomen. Elena's face had gone pale, sweat forming on her forehead as her breathing turned shallow. Their waiter hurried over, but before he could speak, Marcus pushed his chair back, gasping that he couldn't catch his breath. Other diners froze as both began to deteriorate rapidly. Elena gripped the table with trembling hands, her nursing instincts recognizing something was terribly wrong, even as her body betrayed her. Marcus's breaths came in desperate, uneven pulls. Moments later, foam began bubbling at the corners of their mouths, followed by violent convulsions that knocked over their wine glasses. By the time staff dialed 911, the couple had slumped in their chairs, hands still reaching for one another, as consciousness faded. Chaos erupted in the dining room, shouts for help, frantic attempts to comfort them, and panicked voices on the phone with emergency dispatch. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, but despite advanced efforts on scene and during transport, both Marcus and Elena were pronounced dead at Portland General Hospital at 9:34 p.m. Toxicology reports revealed cyanide poisoning in their shared appetizer. The investigation uncovered that a former restaurant employee had targeted Marcus after he'd reported financial irregularities at his previous job. The Riverside restaurant closed permanently, and their families established a workplace safety foundation in Marcus and Elena's memory. It was October 8, 2015, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves across the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. The popular hiking trail stretched for 12 miles through dense forest, offering breathtaking views of valleys painted in brilliant oranges and reds. Morning mist clung to the mountainsides as dozens of hikers began their weekend adventures on the well-maintained paths. David Martinez adjusted his backpack straps as he consulted the GPS device clipped to his belt. At 29, the software engineer had recently received a promotion that finally allowed him and his wife Sarah to take more frequent weekend trips. Sarah, 27, worked as a freelance graphic designer, giving her the flexibility to join David on his outdoor adventures. They'd been married for 3 years and had hiked this same trail 6 times, documenting their journeys on social media to inspire other couples to explore nature together. Their matching hiking boots showed the wear of countless miles, and their high-end camping equipment represented years of careful saving and research. David carried the heavier pack containing their tent and cooking supplies, while Sarah managed the navigation and emergency equipment, including a satellite beacon they'd purchased after a close call on a previous trip. They'd planned this weekend to celebrate David's promotion and discuss their future plans, including buying a house with mountain views and starting a family within the next 2 years. Both were in excellent physical condition, running together 3 times weekly and spending most weekends outdoors. The first day passed perfectly as they reached their planned campsite by late afternoon, cooking dinner over their portable stove while watching the sunset paint the valley below in shades of purple and gold. Sarah had brought her camera to capture the changing seasons, and David surprised her with her favorite trail mix he'd hidden in his pack. On their second day, they broke camp early to begin the 8-mile descent back to their car. The trail wound through a narrow canyon section where previous rock slides had left loose debris scattered across the path. David led the way, testing each step carefully as they navigated the technical terrain. At 2:15 p.m., without warning, the mountainside above them gave way. Tons of rock and debris cascaded down the steep slope, creating a thunderous roar that echoed through the canyon. David saw the danger first and lunged backward to shield Sarah, but the massive rock slide engulfed them both within seconds. David was struck in the head by a boulder the size of a basketball, the impact crushing his skull instantly. Sarah, pinned beneath smaller rocks, watched helplessly as her husband's body went limp. She called his name desperately while struggling to free herself from the debris that had trapped her legs and torso. Their emergency beacon had been damaged in David's pack, leaving Sarah unable to call for help. She spent 18 agonizing hours beside David's body, her internal injuries slowly causing her to weaken as hypothermia set in during the cold mountain night. Her voice grew hoarse from calling for rescue that would never come. Search and rescue teams found their bodies 3 days later after family members reported them overdue. The tragedy led to improved trail maintenance and mandatory check-in systems. A memorial marker was installed at the site, and their families established an annual hiking safety seminar in David and Sarah's memory. It was December 31st, 2016, and the warm Miami evening air carried the sounds of celebration from downtown high-rises as the city prepared for midnight. The Ocean View Apartments building rose 15 stories above Biscayne Bay, its modern glass facade reflecting the colorful fireworks already beginning across the skyline. Residents had gathered on balconies and rooftops to welcome the new year with champagne and optimism. James Rodriguez checked his watch as he arranged champagne flutes on their 7th-floor balcony. At 26, the elementary school teacher had moved to Miami 6 months earlier with his wife Amanda to start fresh careers and build their future together. Amanda, 24, worked as a marketing coordinator for a growing tech company, and they'd quickly fallen in love with their new city and the vibrant community in their building. Their apartment had become the gathering place for their growing circle of friends, and tonight's New Year's Eve party represented their first major celebration as Miami residents. They'd spent weeks decorating with gold and silver streamers, preparing elaborate appetizers, and creating the perfect playlist for their 20 guests. James had surprised Amanda with a weekend trip to Key West as a New Year's gift, and they'd made resolutions to travel more, and start a family before their second wedding anniversary. Their families back in Ohio had expressed concerns about the move, but James and Amanda felt confident about their decision to chase bigger dreams in a new city. Both were social butterflies who loved entertaining and had quickly become popular in their new neighborhood, hosting dinner parties and game nights that brought together their diverse group of friends from work and the building. Amanda wore the sparkly dress James had bought her for the occasion, and they'd been taking photos all evening to commemorate their first New Year's Eve as Miamians. The party was in full swing by 11:30 p.m. as guests crowded onto the balcony to watch the fireworks display over the bay. James and Amanda stood at the railing, pointing out different fireworks to their friends while the countdown to midnight approached. At 11:47 p.m., a gas leak in the building's basement reached a water heater's pilot light. The explosion was instantaneous and devastating, sending a fireball up through the building's central core, while simultaneously destroying the structural supports on multiple floors. The blast occurred with such force that windows throughout the building shattered simultaneously, creating a shower of glass that rained down on the street below. James and Amanda were standing at the balcony railing when the explosion threw them forward into the night air. The building's facade collapsed beneath them as they fell 7 stories, their bodies striking the concrete plaza below, while debris rained down around them. Their guests, who had been standing just feet away, were also thrown from the balcony, creating a scene of unimaginable horror as emergency responders rushed to the scene. The explosion killed 12 residents throughout the building and injured dozens more. The investigation revealed faulty gas line installation and negligent safety inspections. The building management company faced criminal charges, and survivors filed a class action lawsuit that resulted in stricter building codes. A memorial garden was created at the site, with annual safety awareness events held in memory of all victims. It was June 22nd, 2017, and the afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of Bella's Bridal Boutique in Nashville, Tennessee. The elegant shop displayed dozens of wedding gowns on mannequins throughout the 2,000-square-foot showroom, while antique mirrors and crystal chandeliers created a fairy tale atmosphere for brides-to-be. The scent of fresh flowers from the shop's arrangements mixed with the subtle perfume worn by excited customers browsing the extensive collection. Tyler Johnson fidgeted with his car keys as he waited in the boutique's seating area, surrounded by wedding magazines and fabric samples. At 28, the mechanic had surprised everyone by insisting on accompanying his fiancée Jessica to every wedding-related appointment. His friends teased him about being whipped, but Tyler genuinely enjoyed being involved in planning their dream wedding. Jessica Walsh emerged from the dressing room, wearing her third potential wedding dress, a flowing white gown with intricate beadwork that caught the light beautifully. At 26, the elementary school teacher had been dreaming of this moment since she was a little girl, and Tyler's enthusiasm for the process made it even more special. They'd been high school sweethearts who'd dated for 8 years before Tyler finally proposed on the same football field where they'd shared their first kiss. Their wedding was scheduled for August 19th, just 2 months away, and they'd saved for 3 years to afford their perfect celebration. Both came from close-knit families who were heavily involved in the planning, and Jessica's mother had accompanied them to previous dress appointments before work obligations prevented her from joining today's visit. The couple had overcome financial challenges early in their relationship, with Tyler working double shifts at the garage, while Jessica completed her teaching degree. Now they were finally stable enough to afford the wedding they'd always envisioned, complete with a reception at the historic Hermitage Hotel and a honeymoon in the Smoky Mountains. Jessica twirled in front of the boutique's centerpiece, a massive antique mirror that stood 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, framed in ornate gold leaf that the shop owner claimed dated back to the 1920s. The mirror had been installed against the wall using brackets that hadn't been inspected in over 5 years, and small cracks had begun forming in the mounting hardware due to the Tennessee humidity and temperature fluctuations. At 3:22 p.m., as Jessica posed for photos Tyler was taking with his phone, the mirror's mounting system failed catastrophically. The 200-pound antique began falling forward, directly toward Jessica, who was standing just 3 feet away, admiring how the dress looked in the reflection. Tyler saw the danger immediately and lunged forward, shoving her sideways with all his strength. She tumbled into a pile of fabric samples, the soft landing sparing her from the mirror's full weight, but not from its reach. As the massive frame slammed to the floor, one jagged edge clipped her thigh, slicing deep into her femoral artery. Tyler took the full force of the fall, the mirror striking his head and shoulders and driving him beneath its crushing weight. Glass splintered into several massive shards, smaller fragments scattering across the boutique floor. Jessica screamed as blood poured down her leg, yet still dragged herself toward Tyler. Each movement across the shards carved new gashes into her arms and side, weakening her further. By the time she reached him, her hands trembled in the spreading pool of blood that surrounded them both. The bridal shop was found liable for improper installation and maintenance of the display. Their families established a scholarship fund for education majors and vocational students. The incident led to new regulations requiring professional installation and regular inspection of heavy retail displays throughout Tennessee. It was August 14, 2013, and the late summer heat shimmered off the asphalt driveway of the modest ranch-style home in Columbus, Ohio. The 1950s house showed its age with faded siding and outdated fixtures, but Robert and Lisa Kim saw only potential as they planned their ambitious renovation project. Tools and building supplies were scattered across the front yard, evidence of their determination to transform the property into their dream home. Robert Kim wiped sweat from his forehead as he studied the electrical diagram spread across their kitchen table. At 35, the pharmacist had always been handy with tools and enjoyed weekend projects, though he'd never attempted anything as complex as rewiring an entire kitchen. His wife, Lisa, 33, worked as a physical therapist and shared his enthusiasm for hands-on problem-solving. They'd purchased the house 6 months earlier, using their combined savings for the down payment and budgeting carefully for renovations. Both were practical people who believed they could handle most of the work themselves, having successfully completed smaller projects like painting and installing new flooring in their previous apartment. The kitchen renovation represented the biggest challenge yet, requiring them to remove walls, update plumbing, and completely rewire the electrical system to meet modern safety codes. They'd researched extensively online and borrowed tools from Robert's father, who'd worked in construction before retiring. Their families had offered to help, but Robert and Lisa wanted to accomplish the project together as a team-building experience that would strengthen their marriage. They'd taken 2 weeks off work to focus on the renovation, planning to surprise their families with a finished kitchen at a housewarming party scheduled for Labor Day weekend. Lisa had already ordered new stainless steel appliances and modern cabinet hardware, while Robert had mapped out the electrical layout to accommodate conveniences the old house lacked, including under-cabinet lighting and multiple outlet circuits. The morning had gone smoothly as they removed the old wiring and prepared to install new circuits throughout the kitchen. Robert worked from a 6-foot aluminum ladder, while Lisa handed him tools and held flashlights to illuminate the dark spaces behind the walls. They'd turned off the main electrical breaker, but several circuits remained live due to the house's confusing wiring system that had been modified multiple times over the decades. At 2:45 p.m., Robert began cutting through what he believed was dead wire with metal-handled wire cutters, confident that the power was off to that section. The circuit was actually live, carrying 220 volts that electrocuted Robert instantly, his body convulsing in violent spasms. The shock threw him backward off the ladder, pulling down a section of ceiling drywall as he crashed to the floor. In the chaos, the live wire snapped loose and dropped into a puddle of water that had leaked from a disturbed pipe, sending current racing across the wet floor and into nearby metal fixtures. Lisa screamed and rushed to his side, but the moment her knees hit the water, the circuit completed. The current surged through her body, knocking her into convulsions beside him. Robert was already gone, and within seconds Lisa's heart failed too, leaving the kitchen silent, but for the faint buzz of the still live wire. Neighbors later reported hearing a heavy crash inside the house, then silence. When firefighters cut the main breaker and entered, they found Robert and Lisa collapsed side by side on the soaked kitchen floor, surrounded by scattered tools and unfinished wiring. Investigators determined the home's electrical system had been dangerously altered over the years, with mislabeled circuits and unpermitted modifications hidden behind the walls. In the months that followed, relatives spoke about the tragedy only in private, but the story spread through the community as a stark reminder of the risks of tackling complex electrical work without professional oversight. It was January 19, 2018, and the bitter Vermont winter had transformed the rural mountain highway into a treacherous ribbon of ice and snow. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, as an unexpected ice storm coated everything in a deadly glaze that made driving nearly impossible. Visibility was reduced to less than 50 feet, as freezing rain continued to fall, creating whiteout conditions across the remote mountain pass that connected small communities throughout the region. Christopher Adams gripped the steering wheel tightly as he navigated their SUV through the worsening conditions on Route 108. At 31, the veterinarian had grown up in Vermont and considered himself an experienced winter driver. But tonight's storm was unlike anything he'd encountered in his lifetime. His wife Michelle sat in the passenger seat, her hand resting on his arm as she watched the road anxiously through the windshield that was constantly fogging, despite the defroster running at full blast. At 29, the social worker had also spent her entire life in Vermont, but the severity of this storm had them both concerned about the wisdom of attempting the drive home. They'd been visiting Michelle's elderly parents for the weekend when her father experienced chest pains that sent the family into a panic. Though the episode turned out to be heartburn rather than a heart attack, the scare had prompted Christopher and Michelle to cut their visit short and attempt the 2-hour drive home through deteriorating weather conditions. Both were known throughout their small community for their dedication to helping others. Christopher provided free veterinary care to families who couldn't afford treatment for their pets, often working late into the night to help animals in need. Michelle worked tirelessly with at-risk families and children in crisis situations, frequently taking calls at home and working weekends when emergencies arose. They'd been married for 4 years and had recently started discussing plans to start a family, once they saved enough money for a larger home with space for children and the animal rescue they dreamed of operating together. The couple had delayed their departure for 3 hours, hoping the storm would pass, but weather reports indicated conditions would only worsen overnight, with temperatures expected to drop even further. At 9:23 p.m., while traveling at a cautious 35 miles per hour on the steep mountain road, their vehicle hit a patch of black ice that had formed where a small stream crossed under the roadway. The SUV began sliding sideways, completely out of control, as Christopher fought desperately to regain traction on the treacherous surface. The vehicle spun across the center line directly into the path of an oncoming semi-truck, whose driver was equally helpless on the icy roadway, his massive rig jackknifing as he attempted to avoid the collision. The head-on collision occurred at combined speeds exceeding 70 miles per hour, the impact echoing through the ravine and startling residents in nearby houses despite the storm. The crash was devastating, crushing the front half of their SUV while the truck's momentum carried both vehicles off the roadway and down a 20-foot embankment into a snow-filled ravine. Smoke and small flames began spreading from the crushed engine compartment as fuel leaked into the snow. The truck driver was killed instantly when the cab crumpled during the rollover, his rig coming to rest twisted at the bottom of the slope. Emergency crews struggled for nearly an hour to reach the scene, slowed by the storm and blocked roads. By the time they arrived, the vehicles were barely visible beneath falling snow, the wreckage twisted at the bottom of the ravine. The crash claimed 3 lives in total, including the truck driver, a loss that weighed heavily on both communities. It was August 15th, 2017, when 24-year-old Daniel Carter and his 22-year-old wife Rebecca made a decision that would cost them everything. Daniel worked as a freelance photographer, specializing in urban exploration with a daredevil personality that had made him somewhat famous on social media. His obsession with capturing the perfect shot often pushed him into dangerous situations that most people would avoid. Rebecca, a marketing coordinator at a tech startup, had initially been the cautious voice in their relationship. But over their 2 years of marriage, Daniel's adventurous spirit had gradually influenced her to take bigger risks. The couple had built a massive following of 3,000 Instagram followers through what they called extreme date nights, featuring dangerous locations across Detroit's abandoned buildings. Their content showed them exploring places most people feared to enter, always chasing that next viral moment that would boost their online presence. On this particular evening, Daniel had received a tip from another urban explorer about a 12-story abandoned warehouse in Detroit's industrial district. The building featured unique Art Deco architecture and promised panoramic city views that would be perfect for their sunset photography session. Despite light rain creating wet surfaces throughout the area, Daniel dismissed any safety concerns, driven by his eagerness to capture photos before an approaching storm system moved through the region. At 7:23 in the evening, the couple climbed to the roof using a rusted fire escape. Daniel carried his professional camera equipment, while Rebecca handled a ring light for better photo illumination. The deteriorated state of the building should have been their first warning, but their focus remained on creating content for their eager online audience. Daniel positioned himself near the building's edge, approximately 18 inches from a 120-foot drop to the street below. Rebecca stood 8 feet behind him, operating the lighting equipment and likely feeling nervous about how close her husband was getting to the dangerous ledge. As Daniel leaned forward to capture an aerial shot of the street below, the deteriorated concrete ledge crumbled under his 180-pound weight, causing him to lose balance immediately. Rebecca's instincts kicked in as she lunged forward to grab Daniel's jacket, desperately trying to save her husband from the fall. However, her sudden movement on the rain-slicked rooftop surface caused her to slip, sending both of them over the edge simultaneously in a horrifying moment that lasted only seconds. The couple fell 120 feet toward the unforgiving pavement below. Daniel struck a fire escape platform at the 8th floor during his descent, the impact severing his spinal cord and crushing his rib cage before his body continued falling to the street. Rebecca fell directly onto the concrete sidewalk, suffering massive head trauma and multiple compound fractures throughout her body. Emergency responders arrived at 7:47 that evening after witnesses called 911, but both victims were pronounced dead at the scene due to the severity of their injuries. The Metro Police Department ruled the deaths accidental, citing structural failure of the building's deteriorated rooftop ledge as the primary cause of the tragedy. The warehouse owner faced minor civil liability, ultimately resulting in a $45,000 settlement to both families for inadequate property security. Their social media accounts became memorialized, with their final posts serving as stark warnings about urban exploration dangers and online safety campaigns. The building was demolished 6 months later, and the city implemented stricter penalties for urban exploration trespassing, hoping to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. It was June 3, 2018, when 29-year-old Michael Lawson and his 26-year-old wife Emily descended into what would become their underwater tomb. Michael worked as a certified dive instructor with 8 years of experience at a local dive shop, known throughout the diving community for his methodical approach to underwater safety protocols. His personality reflected the careful nature required for his profession, always double-checking equipment and following established procedures to the letter. Emily was a marine biology graduate student, researching freshwater ecosystems, recently certified in advanced open water diving, with over 200 logged dives under her belt. Her academic focus on cave-dwelling microorganisms had brought the couple to the Blue Hole Cave system in Santa Rosa, New Mexico, where she needed water samples from depths exceeding 80 feet for her thesis research. The couple arrived at the Blue Hole at 9 in the morning with full technical diving gear, including twin tanks, underwater cameras, and specialized sample collection equipment. Weather conditions appeared ideal with calm surface conditions, but Michael noticed unusual sediment disturbance suggesting recent geological activity in the cave system. Despite this observation, they decided to proceed with the dive, trusting in their combined experience and proper safety equipment. At 10:15, the couple descended to 85 feet depth, following the main cave passage toward Emily's research collection point while maintaining proper buddy system protocols. The limestone formations around them created an otherworldly environment, but also posed hidden dangers that would soon become apparent. Emily began collecting sediment samples near a particularly interesting limestone formation when disaster struck without warning. A sudden rockfall, triggered by their fin movements disturbing the already unstable geology, sent a 3-ton boulder crashing down to block their primary exit passage. The impact created a complete seal, trapping them in the cave system with no clear way out. Michael immediately attempted to clear the obstruction using his dive knife and bare hands, but the effort consumed excessive amounts of their precious air supply. Worse, his frantic digging created additional sediment clouds that reduced visibility to absolute zero, making navigation nearly impossible in the already confusing cave layout. With air supplies becoming critically low, Michael's gauge reading 500 psi and Emily's showing 400 psi, they attempted to locate an alternate exit route through the maze-like cave system. However, the combination of zero visibility, unfamiliar territory, and mounting panic began to take its toll on both divers. At their current depth, both divers began experiencing nitrogen narcosis, a condition that impairs judgment and decision-making abilities when breathing compressed air at depth. This mental impairment proved fatal as they consumed their remaining air supply while swimming in circles, unable to find their way out of the underwater labyrinth. At 11:42 in the morning, both regulators stopped delivering breathable gas. Michael and Emily drowned in the dark, cold water, their bodies eventually settling in a dead-end passage 200 feet from the blocked exit. Cave rescue divers located their bodies 18 hours later, finding them in the narrow passage where they had made their final, desperate attempt to find breathable air. Investigation revealed the rockfall was caused by natural limestone erosion that had been accelerated by recent heavy rains, which destabilized the cave structure beyond what normal diving activity could safely handle. The Blue Hole was temporarily closed for geological assessment, with new safety protocols requiring guide ropes and emergency air supplies for all technical dives. Emily's research samples, recovered with her body, contributed to 3 published papers on extremophile bacteria, completed posthumously by her thesis advisor as a tribute to her dedication to science. It was July 22, 2016, when 31-year-old Joshua Bennett and his 28-year-old wife Hannah reached the summit that would become their final destination. Joshua worked as a software engineer for a Boston tech company, but his true passion lay in conquering New England's highest peaks. An experienced hiker with 47 of the region's 48 tallest mountains already under his belt, he possessed the methodical mindset of both a programmer and seasoned mountaineer. Hannah worked as a pediatric nurse at Boston Children's Hospital, where her caring nature and steady hands saved young lives daily. Initially afraid of heights, she had been determined to conquer her fears through hiking with Joshua, gradually building confidence on smaller peaks before attempting the more challenging summits. Their shared goal of completing the 48 4,000-footers challenge had become a bonding experience throughout their 5-year marriage. The couple planned this Mount Washington summit attempt as their final peak to complete the prestigious hiking challenge, choosing to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary with this achievement. They began their ascent at 5:30 in the morning via the Tuckerman Ravine Trail, carrying minimal gear despite weather forecasts predicting afternoon thunderstorms. Joshua's experience had taught him that early morning starts usually allowed hikers to reach the summit and descend before dangerous weather arrived. At 11:45, they reached the summit in clear conditions, feeling triumphant about completing their long-sought goal. However, Joshua noticed rapidly building cumulonimbus clouds approaching from the west, indicating severe weather development that could arrive much earlier than predicted. At 12:20 in the afternoon, the couple was photographing near the summit weather station when the first lightning strike hit the nearby radio tower, creating a massive electrical discharge. Joshua immediately recognized the extreme hazard and began leading Hannah toward the emergency shelter. But the metal structure of the weather station had created a high-risk lightning attraction zone around their position. The second lightning bolt struck at 12:23, hitting Joshua directly as he carried metal hiking poles. 30,000 volts of electricity coursed through his body, instantly stopping his heart and causing massive internal damage. The electrical current traveled through the wet granite surface to Hannah, who was touching Joshua's backpack at the moment of impact. Hannah suffered severe burns across 60% of her body as the electricity found its path to ground through her body. The massive electrical shock induced cardiac arrhythmia, causing her heart to beat irregularly and ineffectively. Though she survived the initial strike, the electrical damage to her nervous system caused respiratory failure as her body's ability to control breathing became compromised. Hannah died 14 minutes after the lightning strike, her body shutting down from the massive electrical trauma she had endured. The couple lay motionless on the granite summit as the storm continued to rage around them. Mount Washington Observatory staff discovered their bodies at 2:15 in the afternoon after the storm passed, with both victims showing characteristic lightning strike burn patterns. The National Weather Service investigation revealed the strike was part of a severe thunderstorm that produced over 400 lightning strikes within a 10-mile radius. New safety protocols were implemented requiring all summit visitors to evacuate below tree line when lightning is detected within 10 miles of the mountain. It was February 14, 2019, when 33-year-old Christopher Hayes and his 30-year-old wife Olivia ventured into the backcountry that would become their frozen grave. Christopher worked as a professional ski instructor and avalanche safety course instructor, possessing 15 years of backcountry skiing experience and Level 3 avalanche certification. His expertise in reading snow conditions and terrain had kept him safe through countless adventures, making him confident in his ability to navigate dangerous mountain environments. Olivia worked as a physical therapist specializing in sports injuries, where her analytical mind and attention to detail helped athletes recover from devastating setbacks. An advanced skier who had been backcountry skiing for 8 years under Christopher's careful guidance, she had developed both the technical skills and mountain sense necessary for serious alpine adventures. The couple planned a Valentine's Day backcountry ski tour to their favorite hidden bowl near Aspen, a location they had skied safely over 20 times in previous seasons. They departed at 7 in the morning with full avalanche safety gear, including beacons, probes, shovels, and emergency communication devices. After checking avalanche forecasts showing considerable danger, Christopher noted the risk, but deemed it manageable with proper route selection. Snow conditions included 18 inches of fresh powder over a weak layer of depth hoar, creating unstable slab conditions that Christopher recognized, but believed he could navigate safely. At 11:30, Christopher was skiing first down a 35-degree slope when his skis triggered a wind-loaded slab avalanche measuring 100 feet wide and 3 feet deep. The fracture line appeared instantly across the entire slope, and Christopher found himself caught in the moving debris before he could react or escape to safety. The avalanche carried Christopher 800 vertical feet down the mountainside, tumbling him violently through trees and over rocks, while Olivia watched helplessly from her safe position above. She immediately activated her avalanche beacon and began her descent to search for her buried husband, following proper rescue protocols they had practiced countless times. However, Olivia's rescue attempt triggered a secondary avalanche from the same unstable snow layer just 4 minutes later. The slope she was traversing released in a similar wind-loaded slab, catching her completely off guard as she focused on locating Christopher's beacon signal below. Both victims became buried under 6 to 8 feet of dense avalanche debris that set up like concrete around their bodies. Christopher suffered a broken neck from impact with buried rocks during his violent ride down the mountain, dying instantly from cervical spine fracture. Olivia found herself trapped in a small air pocket, but was unable to dig herself out due to the weight and density of the snow above her. Olivia survived for approximately 35 minutes in her snow cave, but eventually succumbed to asphyxiation as her limited air pocket gradually filled with carbon dioxide from her own breathing. The avalanche debris formed an impermeable seal that prevented fresh air from reaching her location. Ski patrol and avalanche rescue teams located their beacon signals at 3:45 in the afternoon, but both victims were deceased when extracted from the debris field. Investigation revealed the avalanche was triggered by wind loading that occurred overnight, creating unstable conditions not reflected in the morning avalanche bulletin. The Colorado Avalanche Information Center updated their forecasting models to better account for rapid wind loading events in similar terrain. It was September 8, 2015, when 27-year-old Ryan Chandler and his 25-year-old wife Megan entered a restricted area that would become their final resting place. Ryan worked as a geology graduate student researching geothermal activity, specializing in volcanic gas emissions and their environmental impacts. His academic curiosity often overrode his sense of caution, driving him to collect data from dangerous locations that other researchers avoided. Megan worked as a park ranger at a state park in Utah, where her experience in wilderness safety had kept countless visitors out of harm's way. However, her expertise lay in traditional outdoor hazards, leaving her unfamiliar with the specific dangers posed by geothermal features. Her trust in Ryan's scientific knowledge led her to follow his lead in geological situations. The couple was conducting unauthorized research in a restricted thermal area of Thermal Valley National Park, seeking to collect gas samples for Ryan's dissertation on hydrogen sulfide concentrations. Ryan believed his academic credentials justified the risk, convinced that his research would contribute valuable data to the scientific community. They entered the off-limits area at 6 in the morning through a damaged section of safety fencing, carrying scientific equipment including gas detection meters and sample containers. Weather conditions included a temperature inversion that trapped heavier than air gases close to the ground, creating dangerous accumulations of hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide around thermal features. At 7:15, the couple approached a small hot spring surrounded by dead vegetation, a clear indicator of high concentrations of toxic gases in the immediate area. The barren ground and withered plant life should have served as nature's warning system, but Ryan's focus remained on the scientific opportunity rather than the obvious danger signs. Ryan's handheld gas detector showed elevated readings on its digital display, but he misinterpreted the numbers, believing they indicated safe levels rather than parts per million concentrations. His academic training had prepared him to read complex data, but the stress of conducting illegal research may have clouded his judgment at the critical moment. Megan began experiencing symptoms first, including dizziness and nausea, that made her feel increasingly uncomfortable. However, she attributed these warning signs to altitude sickness rather than gas poisoning, having no experience with the subtle onset of hydrogen sulfide exposure. Both victims collapsed simultaneously at 7:23 when they entered a pocket of concentrated hydrogen sulfide gas that had accumulated in a natural depression near the hot spring. The gas concentration exceeded 1,000 parts per million, well above the 700 parts per million threshold considered immediately lethal. They lost consciousness within 30 seconds of exposure. Ryan died from respiratory failure after 8 minutes of exposure to the lethal gas concentrations, his lungs unable to process oxygen as hydrogen sulfide poisoned his cellular respiration. Megan survived 12 minutes longer, but suffered irreversible brain damage from oxygen deprivation before her heart finally stopped beating. Park rangers discovered their bodies at 11:30 during a routine patrol, using gas masks and breathing apparatus to safely recover the victims. Toxicology reports confirmed lethal levels of hydrogen sulfide in both victims' blood, with concentrations 15 times the immediately dangerous threshold. Thermal Valley National Park installed additional warning signs and reinforced barriers around all thermal features, with enhanced penalties for entering restricted areas. Ryan's research data contributed to improved gas monitoring systems now used throughout the park. A memorial plaque was installed at the visitor center, educating guests about thermal feature dangers. It was May 17, 2018, when 35-year-old Brandon Cooper and his 32-year-old wife Natalie made their final visit to a structure that would claim both their lives. Brandon worked as a civil engineer specializing in bridge inspection and maintenance for the State Transportation Department, where his meticulous attention to structural safety had prevented countless accidents throughout his career. Natalie worked as a professional photographer, specializing in landscape and architectural photography, documenting historic structures throughout the Pacific Northwest. Her artistic eye captured the beauty in aging infrastructure, but she relied on Brandon's engineering knowledge to keep her safe during shoots at potentially dangerous locations. The couple was visiting the 1920s-era suspension bridge as part of Natalie's project, documenting historic bridges before their scheduled demolition. This particular bridge had been slated for replacement due to structural concerns, but remained open to pedestrian traffic, despite showing obvious signs of deterioration from decades of deferred maintenance. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon on a sunny spring day, with Brandon immediately noting visible rust on the bridge's support cables and deteriorated wooden planking. His trained eye recognized the warning signs of structural failure, but the bridge's continued public access suggested it remained within acceptable safety margins. At 3:30, Natalie was positioning herself at the bridge's center span for photographs, while Brandon examined the deteriorated cable anchorage points from an engineering perspective. His professional curiosity drew him to investigate the extent of corrosion damage, while Natalie focused on capturing the bridge's architectural details. The main suspension cable's north anchor point had been weakened by 15 years of weather exposure and minimal maintenance, creating a critical failure point that Brandon's visual inspection couldn't fully assess. The combination of rust, metal fatigue, and structural loading had pushed the anchor beyond its safe capacity. As Brandon moved closer to examine the anchorage system, the deteriorated anchor point began failing under the combined weight of both visitors and normal wind loading. Brandon recognized the structural failure signs immediately and shouted a warning to Natalie, but the cable snapped completely before either could reach safety. The sudden release of tension caused the bridge deck to tilt 45 degrees as the north span collapsed, sending both victims into an 80-foot fall toward the rocky riverbed below. Brandon struck a granite boulder headfirst, suffering massive skull fractures that killed him instantly. Natalie landed in shallow water but broke her spine at the C2 vertebra, paralyzing her completely. Unable to move or call for help, Natalie drowned in 18 inches of water as her paralyzed body remained face down in the river. The spinal injury had severed her connection to voluntary muscle control, making survival impossible even in the shallow water. Emergency responders reached the scene at 4:15, but both victims were deceased when recovered. Brandon's body was pulled from the rocks, while Natalie's was retrieved from the river, both showing the devastating effects of the structural collapse. Investigation revealed the bridge had been inadequately maintained due to budget constraints, with routine inspections noting problems but lacking funds for repairs. The county engineer received a formal reprimand, and the county faced a settlement for inadequate maintenance. Brandon's engineering notes led to emergency inspections of 23 similar bridges throughout the state, resulting in 8 immediate closures. It was May 23, 2016, when 2 experienced hikers embarked on what should have been a routine Memorial Day weekend adventure at Zion National Park in Utah. Garrett Lowe, a 29-year-old logistics coordinator known for his methodical approach, had been looking forward to this trip for months. His partner, Nathaniel Brooks, 28, worked in community health services and shared Garrett's passion for outdoor exploration, though he was typically more cautious about weather conditions. The pair arrived at the park as storm clouds gathered. Posted warnings at the trailhead mentioned potential wind gusts and advised extreme caution on exposed sections, particularly the chain-assisted spine leading to Angel's Landing summit. Despite the advisories, both men felt confident, having completed several challenging hikes together over the past 2 years. The ascent to Scout Lookout proceeded without incident, but conditions deteriorated as they approached the narrow ridge section. Wind gusts were building to 25 to 35 miles per hour, with occasional spikes reported above 40 miles per hour, enough to push conditions beyond the usual advisory threshold and create unpredictable crosswinds along the exposed sandstone spine. A thin layer of sand had accumulated on the smooth rock surface, significantly reducing traction for hikers wearing standard trail boots. As they entered the chain-assisted section, holiday weekend crowds created bottlenecks at narrow passages. The combination of gusty conditions and congested trails forced quick decisions about positioning. When descending hikers approached, Garrett and Nathaniel stepped to the right side of the ledge to allow passage, maintaining three-point contact with the fixed chain and rock face. The accident occurred during this routine passing maneuver. A sudden, stronger gust coincided with the movement of other hikers in the confined space. Garrett's right boot lost purchase on the sandy sandstone surface just as his grip on the dusty chain link weakened. The brief loss of contact shifted his center of mass outward, beyond the narrow ledge's margin of safety. Nathaniel, positioned directly behind, attempted to maintain his stance with one hand on the chain. However, the same combination of wind, crowded conditions, and compromised footing affected his stability. As Garrett began to fall, the movement on the precarious ledge caused Nathaniel's boot to skid on the sandy surface. Both men fell approximately 1,000 feet down the steep embankment below the chain section. The rocky terrain included multiple outcrops that caused severe blunt force trauma during their descent. Other hikers immediately called 911, but the remote location and challenging terrain complicated rescue efforts. Park rangers responded with a helicopter team, temporarily closing the chain section. Due to persistent wind gusts, the team held at a staging area for several hours, waiting for conditions to stabilize before beginning the recovery. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as multiple blunt force trauma consistent with a high elevation fall. Toxicology results showed no substance involvement, confirming this was purely an environmental accident. The investigation identified contributing factors: overcrowding, crosswinds exceeding normal parameters, and sand-reducing traction. Following this incident, park management implemented safety improvements. Rangers began more frequent sand removal during peak periods. Additional wind warning signage was installed closer to the chain section, and visitor education programs emphasized weather awareness and crowd management. This tragedy highlighted the inherent risks of high-elevation hiking, even for experienced outdoor enthusiasts. Despite proper preparation, environmental factors and human congestion created conditions that overwhelmed safety margins, resulting in the loss of 2 lives on what began as a celebratory holiday weekend adventure. It was January 14th, 2017, when a frigid Chicago evening turned deadly for 2 women sharing a 5th-floor apartment in the near North Side. Vanessa Quinn, a 32-year-old administrative professional known for her meticulous organization, had been looking forward to a quiet night indoors with her partner. Chloe Patterson, 33, worked in food service and was known for her practical, hands-on approach to solving problems around their shared living space. The couple had been dealing with intermittent power fluctuations that week during Chicago's harsh winter months. Temperatures had plummeted to single digits, putting enormous strain on the electrical grid. Their building management had posted reminders about maintaining proper clearances around heating devices, but the women were focused more on staying warm. That evening, they decided to supplement their apartment's central heating with a portable electric space heater. Chloe positioned the unit near a window where they often sat. The heater was plugged into an extension cord rated for typical household appliances, but not designed for the sustained high-wattage draw of heating equipment. What neither woman realized was that their smoke detector had been chirping due to a low battery. A previous tenant had taped over the device to muffle the sound, a dangerous modification that remained unnoticed. The building's hallway smoke detection system was functional, but wouldn't detect problems within individual units until smoke had already spread. The tragedy began when another power fluctuation occurred that evening. The brief voltage dip caused the heater to cycle, creating additional heat at the plug connection. Meanwhile, fabric drapes hanging near the window were positioned closer to the heater than the recommended 3-foot clearance. A draft through the window seam caused the curtain material to sway, bringing it into contact with the heater's hot front grille. The lower edge of the drape began to char, then burst into flames. Burning droplets fell onto a cardboard storage box positioned beneath the window, igniting additional materials. Within minutes, the fire had spread to upholstered furniture, particularly a couch containing foam cushions that produced dense, toxic smoke. By the time the hallway alarm system detected the emergency, smoke had already filled much of the apartment's living space. The women attempted to reach their front door, but the smoke layer had descended to breathing level, creating dangerous visibility conditions. Heat from the rapidly spreading fire made the exit route increasingly difficult to navigate. The fire department responded within minutes, but the 5th-floor location required ladder truck positioning. Firefighters began ventilation procedures through the apartment windows, while interior crews worked to locate and extract the occupants. The coroner's report determined that both women died primarily from smoke inhalation, with elevated carbon monoxide levels consistent with exposure to combustion byproducts. They had succumbed to toxic smoke before the fire reached their location. The investigation revealed multiple contributing factors: the undersized extension cord that created heat buildup, the clearance violation with combustible drapes positioned too close to the heating element, and the disabled smoke detector that failed to provide early warning. Following this incident, building management replaced all smoke detectors and distributed guidelines about space heater safety. The local fire department launched a community education campaign emphasizing the dangers of extension cord use with heating appliances. This tragedy underscored how quickly residential fires can become fatal. The combination of delayed detection, toxic smoke production, and compromised egress routes overwhelmed the women's ability to survive what began as a simple attempt to stay warm during Chicago's brutal winter weather. It was December 19th, 2015, when a routine holiday drive turned into a deadly chain reaction on the outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota. Spencer Tate, a 27-year-old information technology support specialist known for his attention to detail, was behind the wheel of his compact sedan. His partner, Eli Turner, 26, worked as a retail supervisor and was typically punctual, though he was unfamiliar with this particular stretch of Interstate 35. The couple was making their annual pre-Christmas journey to visit family. Weather forecasts had mentioned the possibility of light freezing drizzle, but road conditions appeared manageable when they departed. Spencer's sedan was equipped with all-season tires, adequate for most winter driving but not designed for ice conditions. As evening approached, temperatures began oscillating around the critical 30-degree mark, creating ideal conditions for black ice formation. Road advisory signs had warned drivers about icy conditions on bridges and overpasses, but the transparent nature of black ice made it virtually invisible to approaching motorists. Traffic flow was moderate that evening, with a mix of passenger vehicles and commercial trucks typical for holiday travel season. The presence of heavy tractor-trailers added complexity, as their longer stopping distances made them particularly vulnerable to sudden changes. The accident sequence began when a pickup truck ahead of Spencer encountered a patch of black ice near an overpass. The driver lost traction and began to slow abruptly. Spencer, maintaining what he believed was a safe following distance, applied his brakes gently and attempted to steer around the slower vehicle. However, a box truck following behind Spencer's sedan had been traveling too closely for the deteriorating conditions. When Spencer's brake lights illuminated, the truck driver realized he could not stop in time. The massive commercial vehicle struck the rear of Spencer's compact car at interstate speed, consistent with the 65 miles per hour traffic flow typical for that section of I-35, generating a high-energy impact. The initial collision rotated Spencer's sedan into the left lane, where it was immediately struck by another vehicle. This sideswipe pushed the damaged car toward the concrete median barrier, where it came to rest after sustaining multiple impacts. The rear-end collision caused significant structural intrusion into the passenger compartment. Multiple airbags deployed throughout the vehicle, but the severity of the impact overwhelmed the car's safety systems. Both occupants experienced rapid deceleration forces that exceeded survivable limits, despite being properly restrained. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the technical nature of the extrication required specialized tools to access the severely damaged passenger compartment. State troopers immediately closed the highway in both directions and began applying sand and salt to the overpass area. The coroner's report listed the cause of death for both men as blunt force trauma associated with a high-energy rear impact. One victim lost airway patency before advanced medical care could be provided, while the other sustained non-survivable internal injuries. Investigation revealed that data from the truck's event recorder showed the commercial vehicle had been following at insufficient distance. Road surface analysis confirmed the presence of black ice at the overpass location. Following this incident, the Department of Transportation implemented enhanced safety measures, including increased de-icing patrols at bridge approaches and temporary warning signage during cold snaps. This tragedy highlighted the deadly combination of black ice, inadequate following distances, and the vulnerability of smaller vehicles in multi-vehicle collisions. Despite Spencer's careful driving, the actions of other drivers created a situation that overwhelmed normal safety margins, transforming a holiday journey into a fatal accident. It was February 3, 2018, when a romantic winter getaway turned into a silent tragedy at a rental cabin on the south shore of Lake Tahoe, California. Lila Harmon, a 34-year-old freelance designer known for her orderly habits and minimalist lifestyle, had been looking forward to this ski weekend for weeks. Her partner, Sierra Dalton, 35, worked as an educator and was methodical in her approach to planning, always bringing backup supplies for their outdoor adventures. The couple had booked the off-season rental to take advantage of lower rates and fewer crowds. They arrived after dark when temperatures had plummeted into single digits, creating one of the coldest nights the region had experienced that winter. The cabin's listing mentioned that the central heating system had been recently serviced. What neither woman noticed was a carbon monoxide detector mounted on the wall, with tape covering its low battery warning light. Previous guests had mentioned this issue in an online review printout left in the unit, but the detail was easily overlooked. The heating system consisted of an older, vented gas heater located in a utility closet. While recently inspected, visible discoloration around the exterior vent cap suggested potential combustion issues. More critically, heavy snowfall had created a substantial drift that partially covered the exterior vent, restricting proper exhaust flow. That evening, the women set the thermostat to 72 degrees and settled in for what they expected to be a cozy night before hitting the slopes. The heater cycled frequently due to the extreme outside temperature and partial vent obstruction. As the night progressed, impeded exhaust flow caused combustion byproducts to recirculate into the cabin's living spaces. With all windows closed against the bitter cold and ventilation fans turned off, there was no active air exchange to dilute the accumulating carbon monoxide. The colorless, odorless gas built up steadily throughout the night as the heating system continued its frequent cycling. Carbon monoxide poisoning is particularly insidious because early symptoms often mimic fatigue or altitude effects, both expected after travel at Lake Tahoe's elevation. As concentration increased, both women would have experienced drowsiness and eventually lost consciousness without realizing the danger. By early morning, both had become non-responsive in the main living area. The tragedy was discovered when a neighbor, noting the couple's vehicle hadn't moved with no signs of activity, contacted the property manager. The manager performed a welfare check and found both women unresponsive. Emergency services were called immediately, and first responders measured dangerously high carbon monoxide levels upon entering. The gas supply was shut off, the heater tagged out of service, and fire department personnel used positive pressure fans to ventilate the structure. The coroner's report determined both women died from carbon monoxide poisoning, with blood levels consistent with prolonged exposure. Investigators later noted that snow accumulation around vent exhausts is a known hazard in mountain rentals, especially when guests arrive after dark and do not perform exterior checks. No signs of trauma were present, confirming this was purely environmental poisoning. Investigation identified multiple contributing factors: the disabled detector with removed battery and taped warning indicator, the snow-obstructed exterior vent preventing proper exhaust, and inadequate pre-arrival safety inspection. Following this incident, the property owner was mandated to install sealed carbon monoxide alarms and implement regular snow clearance checks for exterior vents during winter months. This tragedy underscored the critical importance of functional carbon monoxide detection in any structure with fuel-burning appliances, particularly during winter months when ventilation is reduced and heating systems operate continuously. It was August 12, 2016, when what began as a short sightseeing adventure turned into a deadly encounter with nature's raw power near Page, Arizona. Connor Briggs, a 30-year-old automotive technician known for his mechanical aptitude, had extensive experience with desert driving but limited knowledge of technical canyoneering. His partner, Jacob Reeves, 29, worked as a barista and was known for his calm, observant nature. While comfortable with day hikes, neither man had significant experience navigating slot canyons. The couple had planned this trip during Arizona's monsoon season, drawn by the dramatic lighting that summer storms could bring. Their plan was simple: enter the remote slot canyon for photography, then exit well before afternoon thunderstorms typically developed. When they arrived that morning, the weather appeared favorable with partly cloudy skies. However, slot canyon walls severely restrict horizon visibility, making it difficult to monitor approaching weather. By late morning, distant thunder could be heard echoing off the canyon walls, and radar systems 20 miles upstream were tracking building storm cells. The slot canyon they had chosen was known for its narrow passages and dramatic rock formations, but also for its dangerous pour-offs and shallow depressions that could trap rapidly moving water. These geological features created natural choke points where debris and water could accumulate with devastating force. They entered the canyon when the sandy floor was completely dry and conditions seemed stable. The towering sandstone walls rose hundreds of feet above them. What they couldn't see was the weather system rapidly approaching from upstream. The first warning sign came as a cool breeze moving down the canyon corridor. Small pieces of debris started drifting past them at ankle level, carried by flow preceding the approaching flood. In similar flash flood reports, this drifting debris is often the only warning available, as rising water can travel silently from upstream channels before suddenly entering a slot. Within minutes, the situation escalated dramatically. A shallow sheet of water appeared, followed quickly by a knee-high surge carrying sticks, silt, and organic matter. The sound level increased rapidly as the confined space amplified the roar of approaching water. Recognizing the danger, both men immediately turned to backtrack toward the canyon entrance. However, the pour-off they had easily descended earlier had now become a vertical curtain of water with rising depth at its base, cutting off their escape route. As they searched for alternative routes, a much higher surge entered the canyon system, filling the natural depressions and making footing increasingly unstable. Their attempts to climb the polished sandstone walls proved futile, as the rock surfaces offered no reliable handholds. The situation became critical when floating logs and rocks began moving with the current. Both men were pushed off balance in a narrow bend, where the canyon walls created a natural funnel. Hydraulic features formed at a large chockstone, creating turbulent flow patterns that made movement impossible. The flash flood maintained its high flow rate for several minutes before subsiding. As quickly as it had arrived, the water drained away through downstream channels, leaving an eerie silence. Search and rescue teams were notified when the men failed to return for an agreed check-in time. Teams located their vehicle at the trailhead and began searching at first light. An aerial team spotted clothing downstream, leading ground teams to access the area. Both victims were located in separate pools below a major choke point. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as drowning with blunt force trauma, consistent with being struck by debris while caught in confined water flow. Following this incident, land management agencies enhanced their seasonal closure advisories and added upstream weather monitoring links to trailhead information kiosks, emphasizing the extreme danger that flash floods pose in slot canyons. It was September 10th, 2017, when a late summer afternoon outing on Lake Michigan turned into a tragic battle against sudden weather near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Anton Mills, a 41-year-old delivery route coordinator known for his methodical approach to planning, had been maintaining his small outboard motorboat for several years. His partner, Maya Whitman, 39, worked as an office administrator and was careful and checklist-oriented, though she was comfortable removing her personal flotation device on calm days. The couple had planned this outing to take advantage of what appeared to be ideal late summer boating conditions. The morning weather forecast had called for fair conditions, with only an evening small craft advisory possible. Anton's boat was equipped with basic safety equipment, including 2 personal flotation devices, a handheld VHF radio, and functional navigation lights. What concerned Anton was that the boat's single bilge pump had been operating intermittently, sometimes spurting effectively, and other times struggling with flow consistency. The fuel tank was approximately half full, adequate for their planned route. As they departed the marina that afternoon, conditions on Lake Michigan appeared nearly perfect. The water was relatively calm with minimal wave action, and visibility was excellent. Maya, feeling comfortable with the stable conditions, had removed her personal flotation device and stored it within reach, but not immediately accessible. By late afternoon, a line of thunderstorms began forming on the western horizon. Around 4 o'clock, the wind began shifting from south to west, and short-period waves started building across the lake surface. The change in weather conditions was dramatic and swift. A gust front associated with the approaching storm system arrived quickly, causing waves to steepen rapidly to 3 and 4 feet in height. Whitecaps began forming, and visibility started decreasing as rain moved in. Recognizing the deteriorating conditions, Anton attempted to maneuver the boat to head directly into the waves. However, his timing was off, as he initiated a beam-to-bow turn, and a breaking wave struck the boat mid-maneuver when it was most vulnerable. The initial wave brought water over the gunnel, and the intermittent bilge pump could not maintain consistent flow. The boat began accumulating free surface water, reducing its stability and making it more susceptible to subsequent wave action. A second breaking wave struck while the boat was still recovering. The vessel rolled significantly to starboard, causing unsecured gear to shift and further decreasing stability. During this roll, the stern lifted and the propeller ventilated, causing the engine to over-rev and momentarily lose thrust at a critical moment. The combination of reduced stability, loss of propulsion, and continued wave action caused the boat to broach and eventually capsize. Both occupants were thrown into the choppy, wind-chilled water. Neither was wearing a personal flotation device at the moment of capsize. In the water, both attempted to reach the overturned boat hull, but wave action and wind-driven current began separating them from each other and from their vessel. A nearby recreational vessel observed the overturned boat and immediately reported the situation to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard responded with both a small rescue boat and helicopter crew. One victim was located unresponsive near the overturned hull, while the second was found downwind along the current line. The coroner's report determined both victims died from drowning, with hypothermia as a contributing factor due to prolonged exposure in wind-chilled water. The investigation identified key factors: sudden weather shift, timing error during the turn in steep chop, unsecured gear, and critically personal flotation devices not being worn. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.